Welcome to Built to Finish. I'm your host, Stephen Pivnik. Join me each week as we explore the journeys of audacious goal setters. This includes experienced founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs sharing pivotal moments that propel their success. We'll also be talking with endurance athletes who push the limits of physical and mental ability. This show is brought to you by Acresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services to help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Built to Finish. Today's guest has over 25 years of experience as a clinician and clinical leader in emergency medicine. He joined an emergency medicine group in 2002, became the managing partner, and led the group's growth to 10 locations and 300 clinicians. In 2016, he led the group's merger into a private equity-backed enterprise called US Acute Care Solutions, where he served as president of the non-emergency medicine service lines. Last year, he left Acute Care Solutions to start Crimson Scientific, where he is now CEO. Michael Cetta, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to see you.
Great to see you as well. So I love to start off with the same question. When it was time to exit MEP, what were some of the strategies that you put into place to make sure you had the best outcome for everybody involved?
Yeah. So what you're referring to, MEP was the ER group that I was part of in Maryland. We had about 300 doctors working for us. We had 10 contracts on the East Coast. And we were in an era of emergency medicine that was being continuously put under pressure. Payers were consolidating, hospitals were consolidating. The Affordable Care Act was putting all sorts of extrinsic pressures on smaller groups to comply. And we felt like we needed to do something in order to stay nimble and active and relevant in the emergency medicine industry. So I was part of a group, MEP, as you pointed out, in Maryland. I had several partners, and we started looking at what the alternatives are. And to answer your question, I think what we did was one of the beautiful things about MEP is we had just a wonderful relationship. The partners of MEP, all of us we continue to be, even years later, the best friends. And so that really kind of laid an excellent foundation for a successful transaction. So we were all aligned. There was no animosity amongst the partnership. But our first step was to look at what are the alternatives we could take going forward. One alternative was a full exit into a private equity roll-up, which of course is the route we ultimately took. But we also considered other exits, other possibilities. We looked at the possibility of being an M&A leader ourselves and finding our own private equity partner and being the platform company of a similar type operation. That was another consideration. We also looked at merging with other groups in the area, just as opposed to M&A, just kind of a simple local merger, just to make ourselves bigger. We also looked at the possibility of simply saying independent. So as a partnership, we broke into those 4 different tracks, and each of us researched it for about a month and looked at the pros and cons of each. Then we reconvened, considered all the options, went so far as to talk to a private equity firm to see what it looked like, for example, if we did the platform route, talk to the private equity that was doing the roll-up to form US ACS, talk to other groups in the area, kind of consider all the options. In the end, it was pretty clear that the path we wanted to follow as a group was to roll into the second company into US Acute Care Solutions. And it was backed by a very healthy private equity firm called Welch Carson out of New York. That's their emphasis, is physician-led organizations. And they were an exceptionally healthy partner for getting US ACS off the ground.
So what tipped the scales to make that specific decision, or was it significantly better than the other alternatives?
Yeah, what was interesting is from a purely economic perspective, if we were making a purely economic decision, this would not have been the route to go. We could have chosen an acquisition that would have been more lucrative to the partnership, to us, the owners. We chose not to do that largely out of principle, but also because of the design of US Acute Care Solutions was so unique. The design of US Acute Care Solutions was to keep the ownership, a majority ownership, in the hands of the docs. The alternatives that we had available to us that would have been more lucrative would have stripped away all our equity. We would have been simply employees of the new organization that are owned by private equity. But we chose to kind of maintain some equity, pull it over into the new entity, US Acute Care Solutions. So to us, out of principle, guys and gals who'd grown up growing our own business, had a lot of pride in what we had developed, did not want to just sell it and hand it over to private equity. We wanted to own it, continue to own it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. So you mentioned something really interesting. All of the partners in MVP were completely aligned and you still remain the best of friends. Unfortunately, that is rare, right? Because there's so much drama and, so much friction amongst partners and equity stakeholders of organizations. What do you think contributed to the alignment that you and your team had?
Yeah. And it's funny you should ask that. I would probably point that as to one of the most proud accomplishments of MEP. We did a lot of things. We treated a lot of patients. We cured a lot of disease. We treated a lot of patients without insurance, and we expanded healthcare in Maryland. We did a lot of things that we should feel proud about as a company. But the one thing that I think is most unique is exactly what you're touching on, is this ability. I'd probably have to, I think there's probably many answers to it. One is the founder of the group, the president of the group was a guy named Angelo Falcone, my partner, another emergency medicine doc. And he is perhaps the most principled, has most solid character of anyone I've ever met. He's driven by the proper values and priorities. And so as he grew that group and brought other partners into the partnership, he was absolutely certain that everyone kind of had the same priorities and principles as him. And so it just became, it just kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. As new partners joined the practice, we all had the same vision and priorities on this is not so much necessarily about someone's skills, more about their character. And that everyone had to kind of pass that test as they came in the room. And as you said, to this day, and it's been a long time, I joined the partnership in 2001, 25 years later, 24 years later, these are still my closest friends.
That's amazing. So he basically architected the formation of this partnership and he made sure that the right people got onto the boat.
The right priorities. Yep, exactly.
So you guys were practicing ER physicians as well as business people at the same time. How did you balance? I mean, that's a lot of hours. Either one of those is a ton of hours. How did you balance all of the business roles that you and your team had in addition to the ER hours that you needed to put in?
Yeah, I look back on it and I still scratch my head how I pulled it off. Because it was a lot of time. You're exactly right. It was not uncommon for me to finish a shift in the ER, go into the call room, put on a coat and tie, and then go down the hall and have a meeting in the C-suite for a few hours, or get in my car and drive up the road to the next hospital because I had a meeting at noon. I worked the overnight shift, put my coat and tie on and go have a meeting. And I think a lot of it is just pure intention and motivation and enthusiasm for what we were doing. It was definitely infectious at that point. We had this room of partners. We all felt very good about what we were doing together as a team. And we were growing and it was feeding on itself. Every contract we would add, it was so reassuring that we were elevating the caliber of emergency medicine in that department. And we were told that by the hospital administration repeatedly. Wow, this is the best decision we've made in decades. We'd hear that from the hospital, which only motivates you more to find the next hospital up the road and add them to the portfolio and continue to grow the group and bring other like-minded docs into the organization and expand the group. And it even got more complicated than that, Steve. There was a while we grew into Connecticut and Massachusetts. I was getting on a plane, Southwest, man. I was A1. I was an A-lister. I would be front of the line, sit in front of the plane, get off the plane, get my rental car, go work 3 or 4 shifts, go back to the airport, go back home. It was nuts.
Wow.
But we loved it. You've been an entrepreneur. You know exactly what that's like. I remember when you were building your company, you went through the same frenetic pace that I was going through.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, like you said, the energy is contagious, and like these wins kind of build upon themselves, and they become contagious because I mean, then everybody else wants to score the next one and the next one, and then you almost can't get enough of that dopamine.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't hurt that we were successfully financially. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to minimize that. I mean, obviously the altruistic side of medicine is very compelling and can get you out of bed all day long. But you add on top of that, we were a thriving group and successfully financially. And that success was being felt by all the docs in the organization. We paid above market. All the docs at MEP, for the most part, had an opportunity to become partners. It was just a very healthy, financially and otherwise, organization, and we were sharing the love, if you will. It's great motivation.
So from an executive management team perspective, were all of the roles from a business perspective filled by practicing doctors, or were there any roles that were strictly filled by business professionals?
Yeah, no, you could never run we were $100 million company by the time we merged. You can't run $100 million company with nobody's gone to business school, nobody's a CPA. No. So we partnered with a company out of Texas called PSR at the time. They since moved on, changed their name. A PSR, essentially business model was to support growing independent ER groups just like us. So for all intents and purposes, they provided the CFO, HR, contracting, bookkeeping, all the kind of the foundational organizational supports you need for a company. And we did the strategic stuff. We did business development and operations, but clinical operations, and they did all the kind of the business support. But it was very much a team effort. It wasn't like we handed it off to them. It was very much done in conjunction.
Okay, so they became an outsourced yet integrated part of your organization.
I don't think we would ever call them outsourced because they felt like family. Same kind of thing. In fact, PSR had a very similar culture to MEP. The leaders of PSR came to our kids' weddings and stuff. It was very much a family culture. So we had appreciation for them. They had appreciation for us. But yes, that's how it worked.
Sounds like it was a match made in heaven.
It's almost too good to be true.
So you just mentioned business development. I remember back in the day when you and I were part of the same CEO project peer group. You were really inventing some pretty creative ways to sell your organization into new hospitals.
Yeah.
Right. You had the most complicated buying persona ever, which is the CEO. Right. You were selling to CEOs of hospitals.
Yeah.
Can you recall some of the more creative ways you got in front of CEOs? Because every entrepreneur listening wants to get in front of the CEO of their prospective client.
It's funny you ask this. So I'll tell you what I did, and it didn't work, but I did it. But I'll tell you a couple of things that didn't work, but they're amusing. They're a good story for a podcast. So we hired a marketing firm, and I asked them the same question: what do I need to do? And so they came up with this elaborate marketing campaign. And over the course of 2 months, we sent these 3 heavily ornate packages called presents to the C-suite at every hospital in Maryland at the time. So 40, 50 hospitals. And the first one was they would open this big box, and inside the box was an IV bag. And inside the box cover, it said, infuse your hospital with quality, something like that. IV infuse, all that kind of stuff. And then a few weeks later, they would get another one. It was a big package, and they opened it up. It's a chest x-ray. It's someone's chest. And then where the heart ought to be in the chest was the MEP logo. And, whatever. Excellence is at the heart of everything we do. Something like that. It's a big chest. And the third one was a pill, a big pill, like almost a kit you would fill with gummy bears, whatever. A big pill. And it's, this is MEP is a medicine that will cure your economic woes or something. I forget what it was. But that kind of creative stuff, I don't think we got a single call from any of that clever marketing stuff. Because that, quite frankly, to your point, if anyone listening is wondering how you do get inside and get the attention in the healthcare industry, and particularly in the acute care setting, into hospitals, how you get to that kind of stuff does not work. And I just had to learn the hard way by spending $50,000 or $100,000 for that marketing campaign and having it all go to the trash. If anything, it probably worked against us. A hospital CEO, that does not trigger respect. When you think about what a hospital CEO is looking for, they're looking for a group with integrity that wants to practice medicine, that wants to deliver the highest quality medicine, the most efficiently, all that kind of stuff. And by teasing them with these gimmicks that we tried,
they don't want to see marketing gimmicks, right?
If anything, it works. Probably made us more outsiders. So what did work was the good old fashioned ground game, was building relationships, middle management all the way up. And so I spent a lot of time going to regional and national conferences, building relationships, because I was the head of BD for the group we're talking about in Maryland. So I just spent a lot of time meeting the right people, who was on the board, who's in the C-suite, or who was the rung below them, making relationships. And fortunately, we had perhaps the most compelling sales argument. That was, we were doing such good work in our current clients that more often than not, our next client would be a direct reference from a current client. That's the best way, I think, pretty obviously, to grow a company is by word of mouth and by one client telling the next client. In fact, literally, one of our contracts in the western part of Maryland came because the CEO at one of our current clients was at a urinal next to another CEO who was a target, and over the little dividing wall, they knew each other because they were both regional CEOs. And he said, "Yeah, we love MEP." And he said, "Really? Tell me more." We got that business.
When you started that story, it almost sounded like a Saturday Night Live skit.
It probably could be. Probably could be.
Easily. So key takeaway, business development 101, pound the pavement,
Yeah.
build relationships, and one-to-one referrals are still the number one way to get new business.
Particularly in healthcare. I think selling healthcare, particularly physician services, it's one thing if you're trying to sell a new EKG machine or a new CAT scanner or something like that. I think that approach may be a bit different. But if you're a physician selling physician services, believe in me, I'm the doctor who cares about your patients. I want to integrate myself into your community and become part of your hospital's community. That sale has to be a lot more high touch and genuine.
I totally agree. So when you finally identified the private equity firm that you were going to become part of, and the process went into due diligence, were there any surprises that came up that were potential deal breakers?
This is you're talking about 10 years ago. I don't remember. I mean, the main negotiating items, of course, anybody would tell you the same answer. Kind of the multiple. First of all, the first step of any kind of M&A transaction is validating the revenue. What's our profitability? And then they give you a multiple of that profitability. And that profitability may seem obvious enough. Just look at last year's books and look at the bottom line. How much money did you make? There's your profit, but it's not that simple. There are ways, of course, companies can change profitability. How much do they pay their chairmen or their CEO and so forth? How much of that, should be adjusted? So you have to have an adjusted bottom line. Once you arrive at that, there's some negotiations that come to that number. We agree on the bottom line. Truly, this is our profitability. Then you negotiate on the terms, which really comes down to the multiple. And in our case, it was definitely a lot of back and forth. I think we arrived at a number that we were all comfortable with. And then there was a split. They wanted us to take some portion of the proceeds in the form of equity in the new company, kind of a golden handcuffs, if you will, with a vesting schedule behind it. So we ended up most of us did a 75 cash, 25 equity split, 25% cash and 25% equity split, which to this day, even though I'm no longer with US ACS, I still have a big chunk of equity in the company. I feel good about that. It's a growing company, thriving, and it's a good investment, to put it that way.
And I mean, and since it's private equity backed, there's going to be a liquidity event in the future.
Yeah.
So that money, you will get the proverbial second bite of the apple when that occurs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from an integration planning perspective, how did life change for you guys after the merger into the company? Was it more of the same, or were there significant changes?
I'd say yes to both. So initially more the same. They brought us in. One of the reasons they targeted us as their first acquisition after the platform company came in was because we had an excellent track record. Everything I talked about, how we grew by word of mouth, that's not just window dressing. That was very genuine. We had top marks from quality, patient experience, and economic performance measures. So we were a thriving group, and we were very creative as a group. We used physician extenders. We went into skilled nursing, observation medicine, urgent care. We did all these things to kind of embed ourselves into our clients. So that business model was very appealing to US ACS. So they largely brought us in to tap into some of that, success.
Okay. So you had a traditional land and expand type model where
Yes.
you led with emergency medicine, but then you expanded to other services that the hospitals needed.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think we largely brought that skill to US ACS at that time. Don't get me wrong, the group that was the platform company was doing it very well as well. But I think we had some unique things to offer. So when you asked, was it business as usual, or was it, a new day? I think it was a lot of business as usual because they wanted to learn from us. And we brought that skill across. But then, of course, now you're in a bigger boardroom and you have to fly to Canton for your meetings in Canton, Ohio, whatever. There's definitely a big change. And there was a very vigorous M&A, a lot of M&A acquisition targeting going on. And I was part of that. Once we joined the new group, I've worked with the business development team to find other ED groups that we wanted to bring in behind. As of today, I don't know the exact number. We probably have over 30 groups that have coalesced to form US Acute Care Solutions. So it's very big. We're the second largest group in the country now.
So you're part of this bigger group. You're having a good time, growing that organization. You've got your second bite of the apple coming up. But I guess you were struck by the entrepreneurial bug again.
Oh yeah, holy cow! So there's a little bit of a story there, and I don't want to take all the oxygen out of the podcast, but I'll give you the short version.
No, go for it.
So one of the partners in that group in Maryland that I talked about in the early days, one of the partners in that, one of my closest friends, he died of a heart attack. He was my age. He died of a heart attack just over 10 years ago. He was riding his bike, had a heart attack on the road. It so happens that 1 week before he died, he had an EKG. An EKG is the device, most people are probably familiar with it. It's how they're done all the time, EKGs. You put the stickers on the chest and the wires, and that's how we diagnose heart attacks and arrhythmias and things like that, EKG. My friend had an EKG a week before he died. His doctor looked at it and said, I don't like this. I'd like you to see a cardiologist. He never got to see the cardiologist. It was too late. He died in the end. And my eyes opened up that day. Like I kind of had second thoughts around EKGs in general, and I'll tell you why. But that day really kind of solidified my concern about EKGs as a technology. And I started that day forward, I started seeing that shortcoming everywhere I worked. Every day in the ER, I look at 15, 20 EKGs as part of my work. It's very, very common. And I would walk into the room and I would see like, why are we shaving this person's chest? Why does this nurse have to manually feel the ribs to put the stickers on the patient? There's just way too many opportunities for error and things to fail and the wires and all this kind of, and it just got me thinking like, there's gotta be a better way to do this. So that's the beginning of the story. Jump ahead a while. Last year, you may recall, Steve, I found myself at Harvard. My wife did a fellowship at Harvard in journalism. And as her spouse at Harvard, I had the opportunity to take any classes I want on campus, including MIT. Pretty cool. And so I took business school classes at Harvard and on entrepreneurship.
That's awesome. Taking classes in Harvard and MIT in this stage of life. I mean, talk about an incredible look.
I'll ride my bike across the river, take a class at MBS, HBS, Harvard Business School, get on my bike, go down the river, take a class at MIT, literally like back to back. Little box lunch, the whole thing.
I love it.
So anyway, it kind of really got me thinking, what am I waiting for? I was at USACS. I was, doing executive work there, but I really wanted to solve this problem around EKGs. So I quit USACS a year ago to start Crimson Scientific. It was the inspiring moment I needed. I need something to kind of really get me thinking about it. So EKGs today, I'll tell you what inspires me. EKGs today in 2025, it's the same technology that we had in 1950. If you have a great grandfather who went to medical school, ask them how they did EKGs in the 1950s. They'll tell you they put 6 little stickers on the chest and 1 on each limb, 10 stickers on the human body. That's the same way they did it in 1950. It's the same way in 2025 that they do it if you went to Sinai Hospital or Cornell, whatever. It's the same process. And that just seems absurd to me. We don't use the same cell phone or the same computer that we used, even 10 years ago. Why are we using EKG technology that's that outdated? So my goal is to modernize that, make that better. So I want to make it faster, simpler, and more accurate. And the idea is this: we're creating a weighted mat that simply lays on a patient's chest. Forget the stickers and all the shaving. Simply lay this weighted mat on a patient's chest. It has dry electrodes that don't need any skin preparation. Picked up the electrical activity, sends that result wirelessly to an EKG machine at the bedside. You get an EKG in a fraction of the time, much more accurately. And what's most compelling about this is our mat is going to be embedded with 30 electrodes instead of what we currently use is 10. It's going to have 30, 3 times the amount of data. Every time we do an EKG, 30 times the amount of data. That data becomes a data set to drive machine learning into the precision diagnostic space, which is already being heavily pursued, and we can just enhance it that much more. So we're very excited, not only improving the process of capture, making it simpler and more accurate, but also enabling precision diagnostics into the future. It's going to be next level.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on recognizing the need and pursuing this passion to go bring this to market. So where does the company stand? You started the company
Yeah.
how long ago, and where is the product from an availability perspective to the marketplace? Sounds like there's a great need.
So when I was taking those classes at HBS, I took a class in entrepreneurship. And at the end of the class, I had every team pitch. And I pitched this idea that I just explained to you. And I got first place in the healthcare division. I didn't beat everybody. I just beat all the other healthcare ideas. I got first place. So I knew I was on to something. Then later, about 3 months later, I did a pitch event at MIT called the 100K Challenge. It's a 4-stage pitch event. There's 4 stages over several months. We made it to the finals, and it's agnostic of industry. And we got second in that. And that to me that was really when it spoke to me that we're onto something. So we incorporated almost exactly 1 year ago. So you've only been at this a year, and you asked how close it is to being something that you can actually see at the bedside. It's probably intuitive, but I'll tell you anyway, medical devices take years and years to get to market. Unlike a piece of software that you can do in a long weekend, medical devices with the build and the compliance and regulatory, can take 5 to 10 years. So we have an early prototype that I can put on your chest today and pick up 20 leads of elegant data that shows exactly what's going on with your heart. But we have a long way to go to make that pad reusable, durable, and optimize the electrical signals. So right now, I'm in Chicago. I moved here because I'm part of a med tech accelerator called MHub. The letter M as in Mike, MHub. I think it's the preeminent hard tech, med tech development ecosystem in the country. And the facility that we're in is Fulton Market here right inside Chicago. It's a 100,000 foot facility with state-of-the-art prototyping capabilities. And I'm part of an 8-team. There's 8 teams that are in this accelerator for the next 2 years to help us make progress. We're backed by GE Healthcare and Baxter Healthcare. They support the accelerator. Endeavor Healthcare is a large hospital system in the area. They also support the accelerator. So we have kind of a front row seat with market leaders on commercialization and technology. We have front row seat to venture capital, and hundreds of engineers here in the MHub ecosystem that are helping us move the project forward. I would think our goal is in the next 5 to 6 months, we've come to kind of to the point where we have an MVP, a minimal viable product that looks and feels pretty darn close to what I just described to you as far as the pad goes. So by the summer, we think we can get there. Then we begin the whole regulatory, ball game, which takes perhaps another year or more. So that's kind of roughly where our timeline is. If we hit all our milestones and roadmap, we should probably be ready for commercialization in about 2.5 years, 2.5 to 3 years.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, good luck with that. So obviously very different company from what MEP was, right? MEP was services, and now you're creating a product. What were some of the biggest lessons learned in your entrepreneurial journey at MEP that you're both taking into this new endeavor at Crimson and are staying away from?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm gonna add one more dimension to that answer to that question. Like, what have I learned along my career I've been able to apply to Crimson? And the other dimension that you didn't ask, but I'll include, is my career as an emergency medicine physician. As an ER doc, there's a lot of similarities to being an ER doc and being an entrepreneur. As an ER doc, you're presented with a problem in front of you, call it a patient with an injury. There's a finite number of resources you have to tap into and a timeline which you have to accomplish, either stabilize the patient or send them to the next level of care. So you have to work with a team, work quickly, definitively within a certain guidelines, and get to a goal. And so that kind of mentality is an ER doc. And as an ER doc, you do that 20, 30 times a day, every shift, 20, 30 patients. Sometimes more dramatically than others, of course, but you get the idea. And that's very much how entrepreneurship works. You have constraints, you have a goal, you need to get the team, everyone aligned, pointed in the same direction. So the clinical correlation there is, I think, pretty compelling. So you asked about being a business leader at MEP, kind of being a physician business leader, and the list is long. I would say one thing that medicine does not endorse or encourage is risk-taking for the right reasons. As a doctor, you don't want to say, hey, I read this somewhere, let me try it today. You never do that. But in business, you can do that. You can kind of take a little bit of risk. I mean, look at our current president. That guy's, like it or not, that guy takes some risk. He's the quintessential businessman, whatever. And it can go well, and it can not go so well. Anyway, I learned that side of the skill, the risk-taking skill, the ability to trust your instinct in some ways around business and to pursue it. If your gut's telling it and you have confidence in yourself to pursue it. So that I definitely learned in growing MEP and then joining the executive team at US Acute Care Solutions, that ability to kind of look at all the various moving parts and say, that's the path we're going to follow, and we're going to go down that path. We may eventually have to pivot, which happens all the time, but we're going to go with some confidence and build. So that's something, that's a skill that I didn't necessarily have, I think, until I got it more into the executive side of medicine, the business side of medicine.
Okay. No, I love that. And I love that analogy between entrepreneurship and ER docs. I always make the analogies between entrepreneurship and endurance sports because they have so many similarities. And you're an endurance athlete as well. So I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah. Not an endurance athlete like you are. What are you up to, 16 Ironmen now?
Something like that.
What's the number? You don't be bashful. What is
I think it's either 17 or 18. I
when
truly
you
don't
lose
know.
count, there's something wrong with you, man.
When you lose count, you know it's an addiction. It's no longer a hobby.
So if you lose count of how many children you have or something, that's kind of unusual.
No.
What's your next one? What's your next race?
Actually, it's not a race. My next race is Mount Everest.
Oh, you said so. Yeah.
That's kind of the endurance event of endurance events. And when I'm down from that mountain, I will definitely get back into Ironman because, like I said, I'm addicted to that sport, and I can't wait to visit a new venue.
Yeah. Well, when I read about your experience at Kona, that is all I needed to get up the next day and run that much harder. That is what a fantastic opportunity you had to compete at that level on that stage with those athletes.
No, that's one of the many things I love about this sport. Where what other sport are amateurs able to toe the line with the best of the professionals in that, right? So you as an amateur golfer, you can't go and play in a tournament with Tiger Woods unless it's like some sort of charity tournament. You're not going to go have the ability to play at the Masters with Tiger Woods. But in Ironman, a mere mortal amateur can toe the line with the top 10 pros in the world, which is a phenomenal experience.
Fantastic. It's interesting you say that. I've always said that's what's interesting about golf in general. And endurance athleticism is the same. When we make the same comment, it applies to both sports. And that is, I know exactly how I compare to Tiger Woods. If you put a driver in my hand and say, hit the ball as far as you can, and then I know how far Tiger can hit it, I know how I stack up. Whereas if you give me, say, a football and have me throw it, I don't know how I compare to Tom Brady. I know he's better than me, but I don't know how much better. I know exactly how, Tiger Woods is hit the ball twice as far as I can, whatever the number is. And running in endurance sports is very much the same way. The pros run under 6-minute miles for a marathon after having ridden 112 miles and swam 2.4 miles. It takes me 10 minutes a mile to run the same distance. So I know exactly how I stack up with those guys. It's incredible.
It's that medical precision training in you that leads you to like these types of comparisons.
Measurable. Yeah. Quantifiable. Yeah.
Quantifiable, measurable. Perfect. Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing your experience and some of your lessons learned with the audience. Greatly appreciated, and fantastic catching up with you.
This has been wonderful.
If anybody has any questions for you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
My email, wide open. It's Michael, my first name, Michael @crimsonscientific.com. And if you're interested more in learning about what we're doing, crimsonscientific.com is also our website, of course. So.
Great. We will definitely put that in the show notes. Thank you again for being a guest on another episode of Built to Finish. And thank you very much for listening and watching. If you found this episode useful, please do subscribe and like. And if there's any content here that you feel should be shared with anybody in your network, please do forward this episode to them. Thank you very much for tuning in today. That's a wrap for this episode of Built to Finish. Thank you for tuning in. For show notes and more details, head over to podcast.stephenpivnik.com. Special thank you to our sponsor, Accresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services that help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Catch you next week.